Hi, I'm Martin and this is Make Your Own Sound, the channel in which we are talking about how to create your own sound mixing console, episode 8. In the previous episode, which you can watch over there, we talked about the channel layout in SAC, which is where and how you can rearrange things. Also, how you can create your own user interface configurations and save them. In this episode, we'll talk about the wide mixer, or as I'm used to calling this thing from other digital consoles, the fat channel. But the software we're learning now is calling it the wide mixer, so the wide mixer it is. And without further ado, let's go take a look. The wide mixer in SAC is similar to an area you can find in the majority of hardware digital mixing consoles. Like for example, in this console it's this area, in this console it's this area, and so on. The idea is you select a channel and this area gives you all the controls for the selected channel, like equalizers, dynamics, routing and other things. It's like I select channel 5 and these are its controls. Then I select channel 8 and these are its controls. And you don't always get all the controls with the knobs here. More often you get some of the controls, these which the manufacturer decides are the most important, and the rest you do on the screen. Well, in our case, everything is on the screen, because the whole software is on the screen of your computer. Okay, and on the screen we go. If you watch the previous episodes, you may have already rearranged the layout of the demo version of the software we are working on. And you may have saved an F key that looks like this, with the full mixer, this guy, and the wide mixer, this guy, in one screen. And if you don't, you can find the wide mixer in the view menu. Here it is. Click on it, and it will appear. And it behaves just like any other fat channel on any other digital mixing console. I'll use the mixing project we created for our small imaginary band in the previous episode for demonstration. If I click on channel 1, which is the channel for the vocalist and has the name vocal on it and is red in color, the wide mixer immediately shows all the controls for that channel. You can see that it also says input 1 here and displays the name of the channel below. Also, it has the same label here that says vocal with red stripes, just like in the full mixer. The same happens if I select channel 2 and look at the wide mixer. You can see input 2 and guitar here, and again guitar with green stripes here. Okay, now let's focus our attention entirely on the wide mixer and see what we can do with it. We'll begin with the most obvious thing, the volume fader. Its range goes from -infinity to 0 and then to +20 decibels. Which is a little bit unusual. Most consoles go to +6 or +10 decibels, but rarely to +20. Well, here you have it, which can be very useful, but in some cases can cause problems if you raise the fader too high, too quick. So, as they say, use with caution. Now, some tips for the fader. You can move it up or down with your mouse, obviously, but you can also move it with the arrow keys on your keyboard. And with a controller, but that's for another video. Now back to the arrows. If you press the up arrow, it moves the fader up by half a decibel. You can see the exact value of where your fader is in this little window. Right now the fader is at 0 dB. Let's try it. Up, 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 4 ups and we are now at +2 decibels. Same with the down arrow. Down, 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 and we are back at 0 decibels. If you want bolder moves, hold shift on your keyboard and then press an arrow. It will move the fader with 1 decibel at a time. Let's see, shift +2 ups and we are at +2 decibels. And again shift +2 downs and we are back at 0. If you want finer moves, hold Ctrl and then the fader will move 1/4 of a decibel per press. Okay, another tip. No matter where your fader is, if you hold Ctrl and click on a fader, it will go to 0. This actually is more useful if you work with the full mixer. I can do this. For the faders, I want to go to 0. Or I can select a bunch of faders, hold Ctrl and click on one of them. And they all go to 0. Okay, final tip for the fader. You can actually change the way it behaves. Let me explain. If you take any console and look at its faders, you'll notice they are not linear. They are actually logarithmic. In practice, that means they are much finer around the 0 point. Look how big the distance between -10 and 0 is, and compare it to the distance between -40 and -30. Not to mention -60 and -50. So you can be much more precise when you mix with your faders positioned in this area than, for example, over here. In SAC, the situation is the same, but if you want, you can go to Mixer menu, then to Chan Fader Tupper, and choose one of these 3 logarithmic options. You can even make the fader linear if you so much wish to. Play with these options and see which one suits you best. I personally like to select custom and create my own. When you click here, a special fader will appear on your screen. Then you can move these 3 points. This point shows where the +6 decibels on your fader will be. This is the -12 and this is the -36. What I like to do is bring this point as high as it can go and bring this point as low as it can go. But you can experiment. When you're finished, just close this window. And remember what we talked about in the previous videos. If you want the software to remember your settings, just go to File, Preferences, and Save Default. Now it's done. The way you choose your fader to behave will affect not only its behavior when you drag it with your mouse, but also the behavior of the faders when you use a controller. And remember the danger I told you about earlier. If you're not careful, you can make a microphone very loud with just a little movement and create a serious feedback. Just a friendly tip. Okay, we spent a lot of time on faders, so it's time to move on. Above the fader is the channel label with the name and the color you chose for it. Here you can rename the channel and change its color the same way as in the full mixer. We spoke about that in episode 7. Next is the pan knob. Except it's not a knob, but a little fader. With it you can pan your sound left or right or somewhere in between. And just like with the volume fader, if you hold Control on your keyboard and click on it, it goes in the middle. And if you look over here, this is a more complicated pan for when you use your console in surround mode instead of stereo. This is your normal surround joystick, this is your sub-channel level, and this is your center channel level. We'll talk about the surround setup in a future video. For now, we'll stick to stereo. Next are the solo and mute buttons, which are quite self-explanatory. This button mutes the selected channel, and this button solos it. And then here's the channel disable switch. When pressed, the channel gets crossed with the red X here and also here in the full mixer. If you, for example, mute a channel, its audio and all the processors and plugins you've put on it are still being processed by the CPU. The audience just won't hear the sound, but the musicians may still hear it in their monitors. But if you disable a channel, it's no longer processed by your computer and its audio disappears everywhere. Of course, all the settings for this channel still remain, and the moment you enable it, it resumes its normal work. Next, there's the input section. Here you can choose a physical input from a device for your channel. As we talked in previous videos, every channel in SAC can be mono or stereo. If you want a mono source for your channel, you click here, then select mono devices and choose an input. If you want stereo source for your channel, again click here, then select stereo devices and choose an input pair. Then, if you want your channel to not use a physical input, but instead to self-generate audio, maybe through a VST player like this one, or through a virtual instrument like this one, you may select FX source. There is another option right here, which is now grayed out, but I'll keep it for a future video because it implies the use of another software. Then, if you have a stereo source you want to make mono, you can do it by clicking on this button. And not only that, you can make it mono in several different ways, which you can find if you click somewhere in this area. Next, there's the attenuator, which is more widely known as the digital trim. It doesn't actually control the gain of your preamps, but you could, and in most cases should use it to fine-tune the input level of your sources. If you click and hold your left mouse button in this area, this fader appears, and it can go from -infinity to +20 decibels. Then you can fine-tune it with these little arrows. And if you click somewhere in this area, you can quickly choose an exact value. Let's say -10 decibels. Next, you have the polarity reverse button here. And if you have a stereo source, you can choose how the button behaves. Does it reverse the polarity of both channels, or just the left channel, or just the right channel? Finally, you have this button that swaps the left and the right channels. The left becomes right, and the right becomes left. Next, we'll take a look at the auto sine section. These buttons are quite easy to understand. The red numbers from 1 to 8 represent the stereo master faders of this software that can go directly to a physical output. The pink numbers from 9 to 24 represent the subgroups or the DCAs. If you want to send a channel to a master fader or to a group, just click the button next to the number. By default, all input channels are sent to master fader 1. But if I want to send this channel to more master faders, I'll click their numbers. And if I want this channel to not go directly to a master fader but instead to go to a group, I'll exclude it from the masters, and I'll send it, for example, to group number 9. We'll talk about the group master faders and their routing in the next video, but now we'll move to the equalizer section. It's all this right here. First, you have a button that turns on or off the whole EQ. Then you have a low cut and a high cut filters, and each of them has its own button so you can turn them on or off separately. Also, you can choose their frequency. If you click here on the low cut filter and hold for just a brief moment, a fader will appear and you can sweep from 40 Hz up to 15 kHz. You can fine-tune your frequency with these little arrows. Or you can click here and choose an exact value right away. It's the same with the high cut filter. It also goes from 15 kHz to 40 Hz. And then there's the actual EQ. You have 5 bands at your disposal. All of them are parametric and all of them go from 40 Hz to 15 kHz. Here is the Q factor, which works in octaves and goes from 0.1 octave, which is the narrowest, up to 3 octaves, which is the widest. Then you have the frequency from 40 Hz to 15 kHz. And on the bottom there is the gain, which goes from -15 to +15 decibels. You can also adjust the gains of your bands with this thing that looks like a graphic equalizer. Notice when I raise the gain here, it corresponds to the gain of the 5th band. It is just for convenience. And finally there's this button, which resets all the gains of the 5 bands to 0. Now you may be thinking, I've got 5 EQ bands and they're all peak bands, like that. What about a high shelf and a low shelf filters? And you're absolutely right, I was thinking the same thing when I first opened SAC. But then I got to work and soon realized that in practice there is not much of a difference and the results are quite the same. Here, let me show you. I'll use the FabFilter Pro Q because it's just wonderful for visualizing things. Let's say you want a high shelf filter at 8 kHz. It would look something like that. Now let's try to recreate that with a peak filter. And here it is. A peak with a center frequency of 15 kHz and a Q factor adjusted in a way to match closely the slope of the shelf filter. And here they are, one over the other. As you can see, the biggest difference is right here. But is it much of a difference? Let us look closely. This line represents the 20,000 Hz, and this area shows the difference of just 1 decibel. So, the biggest difference is less of a decibel at 20 kHz, which you'll never ever notice sonically, and moreover it might be more pleasing for the ear this way. And if you find yourself missing the shelf filters so much, you can always do them with another EQ inserted as a plugin. Speaking of which, here are your insert points. But to actually insert something here, you'll need to open some windows. Go to View menu, select FX Pre-Patches, And here's the place where you can insert pre-fader plugins for the selected channel. You can go to View again, and this time choose FX Post Patches. This is for your post-fader plugins. And to actually see the plugins you can choose from, go here again and select FX Choices. I have all these things already configured alongside my mixers and saved on an F key on my keyboard. If I choose this configuration, here they are. And if I choose this configuration, here they are also. Now, if you've just recently installed your demo of SAC, here you may have only these two plugins which come natively with the software. Here's how you insert a plugin. Select a channel on your mixer. Select the plugin you want to insert, for example, this one. Then decide if your plugin should go pre-fader or post-fader. I'll put mine pre-fader, so I'll go here to my pre-fader patches and press Add. The plugin will insert itself and open for the first time. When you close it with the blue dash, you can see that it remains inserted right here. Then, if you double-click on it, it will open again. And now, if you look over here, the moment you insert at least one plugin, a little white link covering the letters FX appeared. On one hand, this is a quick way to see if there's something inserted on a channel. And on the other hand, with just one click, you can disable or enable the whole chain of effects for this channel. Now inserts are disabled. And now they're enabled again. We'll have a separate video just for the inserts and the plugins, so now we'll move on to the dynamics section right here. You have a compressor and a gate at your disposal. All their parameters like attack, release, ratio, floor and threshold can be adjusted in an already familiar way, with the fader that appears when you hold your left mouse button on this spot, with the little arrows, or by choosing an exact value. Thresholds can also be adjusted with these faders, and you have buttons to turn on or off the compressor and the gate. This is the makeup gain, and this is the gain reduction meter for the compressor and the gate. Now, that's not very good in my opinion. The two dynamic processors actually share a single meter. If you use just the compressor or just the gate, it's okay. But if you use both at the same time, the meter is not very usable. I'll show you how it looks using a kick drum. This is the kick drum with nothing on. That's with only the compressor. That's with only the gate. And that's with both of them and a little bit of makeup gain. You have a few additional options concerning the dynamic processors. First, you can make them frequency dependent with this low cut and this high cut. For both of them, that means you can tell them not to be triggered by certain frequencies, which can make them more effective. But for the compressor, that also means you can make it work only for a certain frequency range and use it as a de-esser, for example. Then there is this button, which reverses the gate and makes it work as an expander. And finally, there's the key option. By default, this is set to self, which means that the gate and the compressor are triggered by the signal from their own channel. In our case, that's the kick drum. But if you like to do a sidechain compression or gating, here you can choose which other channel your dynamic processors should be triggered from. And of course, you have all the remaining 119 channels at your disposal. Now, the last section of the wide mixer we'll take a look at is the aux sends. And here they are. You have 6 of them, and honestly, they behave just like any other aux send on any other console, even an analog one. You can turn each of them on with these buttons. And you can make them post-fader with these buttons. Then you can control the level you send with these faders, or via the other already familiar ways using the small arrows, or the fader that appears here. And because every aux send is actually a stereo send, you also have a pan control. And that's about it. Now, there is one more important thing I have to say about the OSCs. I mentioned it briefly in episode 3, but I'll do it again. You may have already come to the conclusion that 6 OSCs are way too few for the large console this software appears to be. And you'll be right. Moreover, if you try to use them as monitor mixes like we did on the analog consoles. And the software actually allows you to do it if you so much wish to. But, and that's a big but, this software has so capable and well done monitoring section that we are going to talk about soon that there is no freaking reason for you to try to use the OSCs for monitors or any kind of sound out of the console. You can, but they're just not meant for that. What they're mostly meant for is effects. You can use virtual effects via plugins, or you can use outboard gear via a physical send. We'll talk about that and other things in the next episode while we explore how the wide mixer looks and behaves on the aux master channels, on the group channels and on the master outputs. So, see you there, and thank you for watching. Oh, you're still here? Great! There are a few more important things I need to mention, like the video you just watched is part of a series and all the episodes are connected. So, if you stumbled on this episode by accident and you wasn't sure what exactly I was talking about, you can go and watch the previous episodes, or at least the first episode over there, which explains the idea of the whole endeavor. And I'll be very happy if you liked the video. It's part of one big tutorial about how to build your own sound mixing console. So if you did, please consider clicking on the like button. And if you find this topic interesting or useful, you may subscribe and click on the bell so you'll be notified when I'm ready with the next video. And I know there are people out there who do what I do and know more than me. So, if you know something that I don't, or have ideas for new episodes, please tell me. I'll be happy to also learn from you.